The snow was settling lightly on the streets of Austin, Texas, as I parked my car in front of Dylan's house. I gripped the gift tightly in my hands, feeling its weight both physical and symbolic. This wasn't just any present, it was my hope wrapped up in shiny paper, my attempt to finally make them see me, not just as the sister who sent checks, but as someone who mattered. The chill of the evening bit at my fingers as I stepped out, my boots crunching against the thin layer of snow, and I carried the package toward the front door, feeling the familiar mix of anticipation and dread. Through the windows, warm light spilled onto the porch, and I could hear the low hum of holiday music drifting from inside. The house smelled faintly of roasted turkey and cinnamon, scents that should have felt comforting but only made my stomach tighten. I opened the door and was immediately hit by the buzz of conversation and laughter. Dylan, standing at the head of the table, was animatedly telling a story, his voice rising and falling with exaggerated gestures. Beside him, Laura nodded along, her smile polite but tight, eyes darting toward the dessert tray as if to ignore me. My mother adjusted napkins on the table, her movements deliberate, while Tyler hunched over his phone, seemingly oblivious to my arrival. I scanned the table for my seat, expecting my name to be written neatly on a place card. Nothing, not a single card bore my name. My chest tightened. I had contributed so much, money for the food, for the wine, the decorations, even those twinkling lights they had gushed over, but still, no acknowledgement, no place at the table. "Hey," I said, forcing a smile, lifting the gift slightly. "Where should I sit?" Dylan glanced over briefly, eyes flicking to the package, then waved a hand dismissively. "Grab a chair from the kitchen," he said as if it was no big deal. Laura's gaze slid past me, returning to the desserts, and my mother avoided my eyes. Tyler didn't even look up. The warmth of the room did nothing to thaw the cold settling in my chest. I set the gift on a side table, telling myself it was probably a mistake, just an oversight. I dragged a folding chair from the kitchen, its metal frame creaking under my weight as I wedged it between two guests. Kyle gave me a quick nod. "Good to see you," he said, his tone warm but distracted, eyes on his phone. I tried to join the conversation, asking about his new job, but everyone's attention remained on Dylan's anecdotes. He was in the middle of a story about a major client, his voice booming, while Laura rolled her eyes when I tried to chime in. "So, Rachel," Kyle said, leaning closer, "still killing it at work?" I nodded, grateful for the lifeline. "Yeah, keeping busy," I replied, but my words were drowned by the clatter of plates and Dylan talking over me about a deal that could change everything. I bit my lip, thinking of the gift in my hands, the representation of all I had done for him and the family, hoping this night would finally be different. Sitting there on that creaky chair, surrounded by plates I had funded, I felt like a guest in my own family. My mother glanced my way, expression soft but distant. "You okay, dear?" she asked quietly over the laughter. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Fine," I said, though the word tasted bitter. Tyler swiped at his phone, oblivious. Laura reached for another glass of wine I had chosen. My gaze fell back on the untouched gift, and a quiet anger began to stir. They didn't really see me, and maybe tonight, they never would. I tried to join the conversation, leaning slightly toward Dylan as he rattled off another story about his big client. Every word he spoke, every laugh that followed, seemed to push me further out of the circle. Laura's hand rested lightly on his arm, her eyes dancing with amusement at his antics, while Tyler didn't even glance up from his phone. My attempts to ask a question about his timeline, to make my voice heard, were swallowed immediately by the booming tales of Dylan's supposed genius. Renee cut me off mid-sentence, turning back to him with another question, leaving my words trailing in the air. The table's attention never strayed from Dylan. Guests nodded, laughed, and praised his persistence, his cunning, his brilliance. I sat there, the folding chair pressing against my legs, and felt invisible. All the years I'd spent helping, giving, and believing, gone unnoticed in a heartbeat. The late nights wiring money to cover debts, reviewing his endless business plans, quietly listening to his dismissals, all of it had been for moments like this. I had imagined tonight as the turning point, the night they would finally see me, not just as the sister who bankrolled Dylan's ambitions, but as someone who mattered in the family. I swallowed hard, gripping the edge of my chair. I thought about the $3,400 I had wired last spring to cover his mounting credit card bills, rescuing him from late fees and the risk of losing his car. I remembered Tyler's regional basketball tournament, $550 for the plane ticket and extra for gear and meals. And the biggest sacrifice, the $505,000 investment I'd quietly made to support Dylan's startup months ago, hoping it would help him reach the breakthrough he'd promised. None of this was acknowledged tonight. None of my sacrifices had earned me even a single glance of recognition. The conversation carried on around me, laughter and clinking glasses echoing in my ears. Sean tried to engage me, asking about work, but even his words seemed to float past, polite yet distant, lacking the weight I craved. I forced a smile, offering brief responses, but it felt hollow, a performance more than a connection. Laura praised Dylan again, her tone warm, but the warmth bypassed me completely. Tyler's attention remained glued to his phone, as if my existence in the room was irrelevant. I clenched my hands in my lap, the ache in my chest growing heavier. I had believed in Dylan, in his vision, in his dreams, even when no one else did. I had stayed quiet when he mocked my involvement, hoping my support would eventually speak louder than the dismissals. Yet here I was, a shadow at the edge of his family's celebration. Each story, each toast to Dylan's brilliance, was a reminder of how deeply invisible I had become. I glanced at the gift on the side table, untouched and forgotten, my carefully wrapped promise of recognition, my silent assertion of worth. Anger rose slowly, mingled with an acute sense of betrayal and solitude. They didn't see me, and maybe, tonight, they never would. I felt the bitter reality of my place, or rather, the lack of one. The folding chair creaked as I shifted, a small reminder that this was not my space, not truly. Memories of my sacrifices played across my mind like a relentless reel. The $3,400 to rescue Dylan from his debts, the $550 for Tyler's tournament, the $505,000 for the startup, all symbols of my silent labor to carve a space in a family that had overlooked me for so long. I had imagined tonight as the moment when all this would matter, when my gift and my devotion would finally force them to acknowledge me. But Dylan's laughter rang out, unchallenged, uninterrupted, while I sat there, still ignored, still invisible, my presence fading into the background of their celebration. The chatter of the table buzzed around me, everyone absorbed in Dylan's triumphs and anecdotes. I felt my heart tighten with every passing second. The realization hit, this wasn't a mere oversight. They didn't care. They had never truly seen me, despite everything I had given. My thoughts returned again to the gift, the representation of my years of support, now a silent witness to my exclusion. For the first time that night, the weight of my own solitude pressed in with undeniable force, sharper than any disappointment I had felt before. I let out a quiet sigh, trying to steady my trembling hands. I wasn't going to leave yet. Not before they had the chance to see me, to finally understand who I was and what I had done. But as I forced myself to remain seated, invisible and unheard, the sting of being overlooked deepened, and I realized how fragile the hope I'd brought with me had become. I sat there, holding the gift, my hands growing heavier with every passing second. Thoughts kept circling back to everything I had done for Dylan and his family, all the ways I had quietly kept their lives afloat. Last spring, Dylan had called me late at night, panic sharp in his voice. His credit cards were maxed out, bills piling up, and he was on the verge of losing his car. I didn't hesitate. I transferred $3,400 the next morning, no questions asked, just to keep him from falling apart. I didn't expect anything in return, yet now, sitting at this table, the memory of it twisted in my chest, a bitter reminder of how invisible my efforts had been. Then there was Tyler. My 16-year-old nephew had been picked for a regional basketball tournament in Dallas, a huge opportunity for a teenager. The team needed travel funds, and Dylan couldn't cover them. I bought Tyler's plane ticket for $550 and sent extra for meals and gear. When he sent a short thanks, I had smiled and told myself it was enough, but when I asked how the tournament went, he didn't reply. I had tried to rationalize it. He was just a kid, caught up in his own world, but the sting was undeniable. But the largest sacrifice of all was Dylan's startup. Months ago, he'd been pitching his new media platform to anyone who would listen, claiming it would revolutionize the industry. I believed in him, or at least in the idea of his success, and quietly invested $505,000. I spent countless nights reviewing his business plan, offering feedback and advice, while he brushed me off, insisting I didn't understand his vision. I stayed silent, hoping my support would speak louder than his dismissals. Yet, at the last family barbecue, he had called me the money machine in front of everyone, laughing like it was a joke. Laura smiled faintly, saying nothing. Tyler smirked, eyes glued to his phone. That day, I laughed along, but inside, the words cut deep. I was invisible, reduced to a source of money, not a sister, not someone who mattered. Now, sitting in the warm glow of the dining room, the contrast was sharp. I could hear the laughter around me, plates clattering, voices rising, and yet, I was completely alone in the middle of it all. All the money, the time, the effort I had invested, it was as if it had never existed. My sacrifices had built Dylan's comfort, his security, his pride, and yet, no one had even glanced my way to acknowledge it. The thought of it made my chest tighten, a mixture of anger and grief swirling inside me. I glanced at the gift on the side table. The carefully wrapped contract for Dylan's startup, a tangible representation of all I had done, still untouched. For months I had hoped that tonight it would finally show them my value, my place in their lives. And now, it seemed like a relic of my own naivety. Every wire transfer, every late-night phone call, every effort to support them, the truth hit me like ice. I was not a participant in this family, not in the way I had imagined. My role had always been that of the invisible financial supporter. They saw Dylan as the shining star, and me as the shadow who paid for everything, nothing more. The memory of every sacrifice replayed vividly. The $3,400 for his credit card, the $550 for Tyler's trip, the $505,000 investment, it had all been for them. And for what? To sit here on a folding chair, ignored, while the rest of the table laughed and clinked glasses. Sean had glanced at me once, a small nod, but the gesture barely reached me. Laura focused on Dylan, her hand resting lightly on his arm, beaming with pride. Tyler had his nose in his phone, oblivious to the gift I had provided, to the opportunities one had made possible. Even the carefully arranged decorations, the wine, the roast, all bought or funded by me, were treated as though Dylan alone had created this perfect night. Every detail I had controlled, every dollar I had contributed, had been swallowed by the pretense of family togetherness. I clenched my hands in my lap, the wrapping paper of the gift crinkling under my fingers. The warmth in the room felt like a mockery, and the light spilling from the holiday lamp seemed to accentuate my isolation rather than comfort me. I realized, with a clarity I could no longer ignore, that my efforts had never been seen. The family I had sacrificed for, the brother and nephew and girlfriend I had supported, considered me a background fixture, not someone with thoughts, needs, or pride of my own. It wasn't just disappointment anymore. It was recognition of the truth. I was a ghost in my own family, visible only through what I provided. Each memory, the $3,400, the $550, the $505,000, was a monument to my invisibility. I understood now that my place at the table had never been about me. It had always been about Dylan and his success, and I had believed, foolishly, that my quiet contributions would be acknowledged, that my support would matter beyond dollars and cents. Sitting there, I let the anger simmer, a slow, steady burn. I looked at the crumpled ribbon on the gift, a symbol of the night's betrayal. It had been my chance to prove myself, to show them the real depth of my commitment and care. Yet, it lay ignored, half buried among napkins and empty wine glasses, invisible as I felt. And as the chatter and laughter continued around me, I knew with unwavering certainty that my sacrifices would remain invisible unless I took action. The realization didn't weaken me. It strengthened a resolve I hadn't felt all evening. I wasn't just the silent supporter anymore. My contributions, my time, my money, my care, they were mine to control. If they refused to see me, if they refused to value my sacrifices, then it was my right, and perhaps my duty, to reclaim them on my own terms. I sat there, clutching my fork like a lifeline, while Dylan raised his glass, grinning like he owned the room. "Big news, everyone," he announced, his voice booming over the clinking of plates and laughter. "The startup finally landed the deal, $520,000, signed, sealed, delivered. This is the break we've been waiting for." The table erupted into applause, cheers, and smiles, everyone looking at him as if he'd done it all alone. Laura's eyes sparkled with pride, her hand brushing Dylan's arm. Tyler finally glanced up from his phone, nodding with a rare spark of excitement. My stomach twisted. All the money, the late nights, the hours I'd spent quietly making sure his dream stayed alive, it had all led to this moment. And yet, no one even glanced at me. I forced a smile, pretending to join in the celebration, passing the mashed potatoes to my cousin Sean. His kind eyes met mine for a brief second, but he said nothing. The voices around the table swelled, everyone laughing at Dylan's retelling of the pitch. I remembered wiring money to cover his credit card debt, $300, so he wouldn't lose his car, sending Tyler $550 for his basketball tournament, and the $520,000 I'd quietly invested in the startup. Not a word of acknowledgement came my way. Dylan's pride swelled with every sentence. He recounted his negotiations, the contacts, the hard work, as if every step had been his alone. Renee leaned in, nodding, as though her pep talks had been the key to the deal. Laura chimed in softly, praising him for keeping everything together. Tyler, after a brief glance at me, returned to his screen. The gift I'd brought, carefully wrapped, still sat untouched on the side table, a silent symbol of everything I had done. A hot wave of anger rolled over me, mixing with the sting of invisibility. I had believed tonight would be different. I had imagined the moment Dylan would notice, perhaps raise an eyebrow at the package, maybe even say, "Rachel, this deal wouldn't exist without you." But he didn't. The room's laughter and clinking glasses only pressed harder against my chest. I thought of all the late nights reviewing business plans, offering feedback, the careful choices I made to support his vision. Every dollar had been a piece of myself, every hour a quiet sacrifice. And here they were, cheering him on as if I didn't exist. My hands trembled slightly as I set my fork down, the wine I'd chosen now tasting bitter on my tongue. I tried to catch Tyler's eye, to offer a small smile, but he was absorbed in his phone again. Sean attempted to include me in a side conversation about work, but my words barely reached him. Even his kindness felt distant, like a reminder of the gap between me and them. My heart tightened, knowing I had done everything to be part of this family, yet I remained nothing more than a shadow in the glow of their celebration. As Dylan finished his story, the room erupted again, voices overlapping, laughter bouncing off the walls. I felt a cold clarity settle over me. All the effort, all the money, all the belief, they hadn't seen me. Not really. I sat back, chair creaking under me, hands folded tightly in my lap, imagining what it would take for them to finally acknowledge me. For a brief moment, I toyed with the idea of standing up and shouting, but the anger and disappointment were sharper than any words could capture. I glanced at the side table. The gift, the contract representing my $520,000 investment, glared back at me from its neglected corner. My chest ached with a mix of fury and resolve. For years, I had funded dreams, paid debts, and given my heart to this family. Tonight made it painfully clear, they never valued me. Not the sister, not the aunt, just the money that made things possible. The noise of their celebration continued around me, but I felt detached, as if watching through a glass wall. My fingers gripped the edge of the chair, knuckles whitening. Each laugh, each toast, each cheer felt like a needle prick, reminding me that my contributions were invisible. This wasn't just disappointment anymore, it was a reckoning. I took a slow breath, letting the cold fire of clarity replace the heat of anger. Tonight wasn't about fitting in, earning their approval, or waiting for recognition. It was about seeing the truth. They had their joy, their celebration, their success, and I had the knowledge of what had really made it possible. The realization hardened inside me, setting the stage for the moment I would no longer remain unseen. The dinner was humming with chatter and clinking glasses, but I couldn't shake the unease settling into my chest. That's when my eyes fell on the place cards, neatly folded near the centerpiece. One of them, the one that should have carried my name, didn't. Instead of Rachel Morgan, it read Rachel Dawson. My hands froze midair, fingers brushing the card as if touching it could make the mistake vanish. I hadn't used that name in over a decade. That chapter of my life was buried, carefully locked away. Seeing it there wasn't a simple oversight, it was deliberate. A jab, sharp and cutting, meant to remind me I wasn't truly part of this gathering. My heart sank as the reality hit me. This wasn't just a card, it was a symbol of exclusion, a calculated reminder of where I stood in their eyes. Dylan's eyes flicked to mine, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "What's wrong, Rachel?" he asked, his tone light but edged with amusement. I forced a tight smile, trying to mask the sting, but it did nothing to soften the weight pressing down on my shoulders. "Oh, just a small mix-up," he waved dismissively. His laugh cut through the room, sharp and careless. Laura, sitting beside him, stifled a giggle, her eyes glinting with that same sense of ridicule. I gritted my teeth, realizing the full scope of what they were doing. This wasn't innocent, it was intentional. It was a reminder that no matter what I'd done for them, I didn't belong. I pushed my chair back, mechanically gathering plates, needing movement to cope with the surge of emotions. The clatter of dishes tried to drown out the laughter and conversation, but the sting of their neglect was impossible to ignore. Dylan's voice floated from the table, loud and casual. "Look at Rachel, always good at the little chores," he said. The words weren't quiet. Everyone heard. Laura's laugh followed, bright and cruel, echoing off the walls. "Yeah, she's got that down," she added, like I was no more than hired help, invisible to them as a family member. I tightened my grip on the plates, porcelain cold against my palms. I'd paid for this meal, the wine, the decorations, the lights, all of it, and yet here I was reduced to a servant in their eyes. Moving silently, I stacked silverware, avoiding their gaze. The room's warmth felt suffocating, the holiday lights mocking me. My chest throbbed with anger, humiliation, and a sudden clarity. I wasn't seen. Not really. Sean, trying to lighten the tension, picked up the card with Rachel Dawson printed on it. "Hey, Rachel," he asked gently, curiosity soft in his voice. "Why Dawson? Didn't you switch back to Morgan years ago?" All eyes turned toward me, and I felt the sting of exposure. Dylan shrugged, leaning back with a careless grin. "Like I said, just a typo," he said. Laura snorted beside him, hiding amusement behind her hand. The heat rose in my chest, a mix of shame and rage. This wasn't a typo. Everyone knew my name. They knew my history. That card was a deliberate line drawn in the sand, marking me as an outsider. I set the plates down harder than intended, the clatter echoing sharply. "It's not a typo," I said, my voice steady though low. "You all know my name." Dylan raised an eyebrow, smirk unyielding. "Relax, Rachel. It's just a card," he said, dismissing me with practiced ease. Laura leaned in, whispering, both of them chuckling quietly. Vivian glanced my way briefly, lips parting as if to speak, but then she turned back, busying herself with a napkin. Tyler never looked up, glued to his phone. The warmth of the room mocked me, a stark contrast to the cold realization settling in my chest. I kept moving, mechanically clearing dishes, each motion stoking the fire building inside. Dylan's casual dismissals, Laura's laughter, the deliberate wrong name, every detail was a needle pricking at the hope I'd clung to all evening. The gift I brought, the one I'd imagined would make them see me, was untouched, a relic of misplaced faith. Sean's attempt to engage me in conversation barely reached me. I nodded, murmured a reply, and continued stacking plates, weighed down by the family's disregard. "Don't work too hard, Rachel," Dylan called from the dining room, voice teasing. "Leave some chores for the rest of us." Laura laughed again, sharp and grating. I paused in the doorway, hands trembling. The urge to confront them, to call out their cruelty, surged through me, but I held it back. For now, I kept moving, step by step, until I could decide what to do next. I slipped into the living room, seeking a moment of quiet. The holiday lights glowed softly, casting long shadows. My gift, carefully wrapped, still sat on the side table, now half buried under napkins and glasses. Unopened, unseen. My sacrifice reduced to nothing more than overlooked paper. The cold reality hit me. After years of giving everything, money, time, faith, I was invisible. Completely. I gripped the gift tightly, my hands trembling as the weight of it felt heavier than I expected. All these years, all the sacrifices, every late night wiring money, every step I'd taken to keep Dylan's dream afloat, they had been invisible to everyone around this table. I pushed my chair back slowly, drawing every eye in the room toward me. The chatter and laughter faltered as I stood, the gift, now an envelope holding the investment contract, clutched in both hands. "This," I said, my voice cutting sharply through the hum of conversation, "is the investment contract for Dylan's startup. $520,000, from me." Silence fell like a thick blanket. Dylan froze mid-laugh, Laura's hand paused on her glass, Tyler's phone slipped from his fingers, and Megan's eyes widened. For once, the party didn't move around me. The energy of control that had been so heavily in their favor faltered, caught off guard by my declaration. Dylan straightened, his smirk faltering into an uncertain line. "Come on," he said, his tone casual but edged with tension. "You're making a scene." I shook my head, refusing to lower the envelope. "I am not making a scene. I am showing the truth. Every deal, every milestone you boasted about tonight, Dylan, it came from this. From me." Laura, ever poised, leaned slightly forward, her laugh caught somewhere between disbelief and dismissive amusement. "You're joking, right?" she said, tilting her head, her eyes narrowing. "This is supposed to be a joke?" Tyler finally looked up from his phone, his expression a mixture of confusion and shock. "No way," he muttered, voice low but audible. I ignored their attempts to diminish me. My focus was on Dylan and the truth he had worked so hard to obscure. "I funded the startup. I believed in you. I trusted you. And tonight, I watch you take all the credit. Not one word of thanks. Not one acknowledgement of the sacrifices I made." My hands tightened around the contract. "This is more than money. This is years of my effort, my faith, my trust. And it's gone unrecognized." Dylan leaned back, arms crossed, trying to reclaim some semblance of control. "Nice try," he said, his voice a blend of amusement and condescension. "You're not that kind of player." Megan snorted beside him, her laugh sharp and unkind. "Yeah, you think you're some big investor?" she said, disbelief coating every word. I felt a surge of clarity and fury. I wasn't just confronting them for recognition, I was drawing a line. Slowly, deliberately, I began tearing the envelope open, peeling back the carefully folded pages inside. The contract was revealed, its crisp edges a stark contrast to the chaos around the table. "This is the truth," I said, lifting the pages high for everyone to see. $520,000. My investment. My choice. My support. Not a gift. Not a favor. And I am done being invisible. Dylan's face paled. His confident posture crumpled, replaced by an almost imperceptible panic. Laura's lips parted, her carefully curated calm slipping. Megan's smirk vanished, and Tyler's eyes were wide, unblinking. I didn't wait for their reactions to sink in. I walked steadily toward the back door, the contract in my hands. The cold night air outside greeted me like an ally, sharp and cleansing. Without hesitation, I tossed the contract into the small outdoor fireplace, watching the flames consume the pages. Sparks danced into the night, carrying away the years I had poured into a family that had failed to see me. I pulled out my phone and typed a quick, decisive message to the investment firm overseeing Dylan's startup. "Withdraw funding for Dylan's company, effective immediately." I pressed send. My chest felt tight but liberated, every breath steadier than it had been for years. Back inside, the table was stunned into silence. Dylan tried to speak, stammering, You can't," but I cut him off with a firm shake of my head. "I already did." Tyler looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. Megan and Laura were speechless, faces drained of their usual amusement. Sean, who had remained quiet, met my eyes briefly, his expression unreadable. For the first time that night, I felt visible, not because they acknowledged me, but because I had claimed my power. The laughter was gone, replaced by a thick, heavy stillness that confirmed one truth. I was no longer invisible, and the cost of my absence would be undeniable. The fire outside had burned more than paper. It had burned the need for their approval. The contract's ashes were a symbol of my choice, my life, my effort, my resources, my worth, all reclaimed. I stepped back into the night, leaving behind the shocked faces and the broken pretenses of a family that had never truly recognized me. For the first time in years, I felt the weight lift. This was my line in the sand, drawn in fire and resolve, marking a freedom I had long denied myself. The night air hit me like a sudden shock as I stepped into the backyard, the winter chill biting through my coat. In my hands, the contract I had spent weeks preparing for Dylan's startup felt heavier than ever, not with paper, but with years of overlooked effort and silent sacrifices. The house behind me was alive with laughter and clinking glasses, yet every cheer and toast felt miles away, irrelevant to the storm raging inside me. I knelt beside the small fire pit, the flames dancing warmly, indifferent to the frost in the air. My fingers trembled as I laid the contract across the glow, the black ink stark against the white pages, every line a testament to what I had given, the money, the trust, the sleepless nights spent ensuring Dylan's venture would succeed. With a deep, deliberate breath, I set the edges of the contract aflame. The paper hissed, curling and blackening instantly, sparks lifting like tiny fleeting memories. I watched the fire consume the tangible proof of my sacrifice, a sharp satisfaction mingling with the bitter ache of loss. This wasn't destruction for its own sake, it was release. Each flicker of the burning contract felt like a chain breaking, years of frustration and indivisibility dissolving into smoke that vanished into the cold night. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, fingers numb but steady. Opening the email app, I typed quickly, every keystroke deliberate. Withdraw my funding for Dylan's startup, effective immediately, I wrote, my heart hammering with the finality of my decision. I hit send. The screen blinked, confirming the message had gone through. My breath came in shallow, exhilarated gasps as the weight I had carried for decades seemed to lift fraction by fraction. Back inside, I could hear the sudden hush that swept through the dining room. The laughter faltered, glasses paused mid-clink, and a ripple of confusion spread across the faces I had once tried so desperately to impress. Dylan's eyes were wide, disbelief making his usual smirk falter. Laura's hand froze on her glass, Megan's smile disappeared, and Tyler dropped his phone as if it had suddenly become too heavy to hold. Every glance shot toward me was an acknowledgement that I had finally stepped out of the shadows. For a long moment, no one spoke. The room was suspended in that quiet, my pulse echoing in my ears louder than any of their voices. I felt something I hadn't in years, freedom. The years of invisibility, the overlooked contributions, the quiet resentment, they all crystallized into one clear, undeniable truth. I didn't need their recognition. I didn't need their approval. I had reclaimed my own power, and nothing inside me would let it slip away again. The fire outside had reduced the contract to ash, but inside me, something far more profound had ignited. Clarity, resolve, and an unshakable sense of self-worth blazed hotter than any ember. I could finally see that the family I had longed to belong to was never going to see me for who I was. But I didn't need them to. I had my own life to build, my own purpose to follow, and my own principles to honor. As the first faint light of dawn touched the sky, my phone buzzed. A message from an old friend, a reminder that there were people in my life who truly valued me, who had seen me and my efforts from the start. I smiled faintly, the corners of my lips tugging upward as the final vestiges of doubt melted away. The snow outside glistened under the streetlights, a quiet promise of a new beginning. I stood there, hands still warm from the fire, heart steady and resolute. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I wasn't fighting for acknowledgement or struggling for belonging. I was living for myself. The city around me, once just a backdrop for the sacrifices I had made, now felt like a landscape of opportunity. I would rebuild, invest in things that mattered, and support causes that reflected my values. Every choice from this point forward would be mine alone. The echo of their surprise behind me faded into the distance. Dylan, Laura, Megan, Tyler, they would adjust to this new reality without me, as I adjusted to mine with courage and determination. I took one last look at the fire pit, where the ashes of the contract lay scattered, cold but complete. It was over. The chapter was closed, and I had emerged from it unbroken, stronger than before. The winter air felt less harsh now, a gentle promise rather than a sting. I walked back to my apartment with a sense of quiet triumph, ready to invest my energy, my resources, and my heart into things that truly mattered. And for the first time in years, I felt whole, unburdened, and entirely free. The past was behind me, the mistakes acknowledged and released, and the future, my future, was waiting, bright, unclaimed, and entirely my own. The confirmation arrived the next morning, blinking quietly on my phone. My withdrawal from Dylan's startup was official. The words, simple and bureaucratic, carried a weight I had never expected. The ink on that digital page signified more than money. It was the closure I had longed for, the final severing of ties that had bound me in invisible chains for years. I read it over and over, letting each sentence sink in, the gravity of my decision settling deep into my chest. A part of me wanted to call out, to announce my liberation, but instead, I sat in silence, letting the room hum around me as I absorbed the reality. Once the initial shock ebbed, I turned my attention to something constructive, something that could transform the energy I had poured into fruitless loyalty into genuine impact. I had researched long hours before the party, looking for avenues where my resources and my convictions could create meaningful change. I found a scholarship fund for women in technology, an organization dedicated to supporting young women entering a field where opportunities were scarce, and recognition even scarcer. The decision to donate was instantaneous, guided by clarity and purpose. I allocated $315,000 from my remaining savings to establish the Rachel Morgan Scholarship, a grant aimed at empowering those overlooked and undervalued. The act of donating was intimate, quiet, yet profoundly affirming. Over the next days, the fund's director called to express gratitude, her voice warm, sincere, and unlike any acknowledgement I had received from Dylan, Laura, or the others. "This will change lives, Rachel," she said. And in that moment, I felt the spark of something I hadn't realized I was missing. Pride untethered from expectation, fulfillment detached from approval. It was mine, and mine alone. The shift in perspective carried over into my daily life. I enrolled in a coding boot camp I had deferred for years, nights stretching into early mornings filled with algorithms, loops, and code that made sense to me in ways people around Dylan had never seen. The challenge of mastering new skills, of seeing tangible results from my effort, grounded me. Each completed module, each problem solved, was a reminder that I could contribute, that I had value beyond financial support. My apartment transformed alongside me. Books and plants filled spaces that had once been occupied by holiday decorations meant for a family that barely noticed me. The air felt lighter, my movements freer. Connections I had avoided or postponed slowly returned, not out of obligation but choice. The local women's tech group became a lifeline of mutual respect and shared ambition. I met individuals who didn't expect me to pay for their success, who didn't measure me by what I could give them, but by what I could create, by what I could contribute. Discussions about programming challenges, leadership, and career growth replaced the stifling conversations around a dinner table where my worth had been invisible. I realized then that family was not a predetermined set of people, but those who recognized your worth, who matched your effort with respect and acknowledgement. I kept a quiet journal, documenting the small victories, the breakthroughs in learning, and the stories from the scholarship recipients. One letter arrived that brought tears to my eyes, a single mother studying cybersecurity, expressing gratitude for the chance to pursue a future she had once thought unreachable. Her words echoed in my mind, "Because of you, I see myself differently." That was the validation I had longed for all along, not applause, not recognition from those who had dismissed me, but real impact, real change. Even Dylan's attempts to reach out in the weeks following the party went unanswered. Laura's hesitant apologies and half-hearted explanations never broke my resolve. Tyler's indifference continued to hum like background noise. Sean checked in once or twice, and though I appreciated his kindness, it reminded me that I could no longer rely on someone else's gaze to measure my worth. I was rebuilding, reshaping, defining life on my own terms. Christmas decorations, carefully stored in neat boxes, were now symbols of autonomy rather than sacrifice. I arranged my living space to reflect who I was becoming, intentional, focused, and resilient. Nights spent studying code, mornings walking through the streets of Seattle, evenings reading letters from scholarship recipients, all of it contributed to a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced in years. I paused one evening, looking out at the city lights reflecting in my window. The twinkling streets mirrored the earlier holiday lights, but this time they did not mock me. They reflected a life I had chosen, a life unbound by expectations that had never served me. Family, I realized, was not about enduring unreciprocated sacrifice. It was about reciprocal respect and recognition, and I finally understood that. The Rachel Morgan Scholarship became more than a fund, it was a testament to my endurance, my insight, and my refusal to remain invisible. Each success story, each small victory of the women I supported, reinforced the lessons I had learned that fateful night. Love and respect could not be bought or forced, but could be fostered through genuine action and purpose. For the first time, I wasn't living to be seen by those who disregarded me. I was living for myself, for the lives I could touch, for the future I could shape. The journey was ongoing, every line of code a step forward, every mentorship and scholarship application a mark of real influence. Freedom, I realized, was not the absence of ties, but the presence of choice. And in that choice, I had found a family of my own making, one built on respect, recognition, and shared ambition. Standing by the window, sipping coffee as the city murmured below, I felt it clearly. I had finally found my place, not by sacrificing myself for others, but by valuing myself, by defining my own worth. The past was a lesson, the family I left behind a reminder, and the future an open expanse waiting for me to shape it. I was no longer invisible, no longer a shadow. I was Rachel Morgan, fully present, fully seen, fully free.